This is America, and the question of birthright citizenship, whether a president has ultimate say over it, has been sitting at the Supreme Court. It's sparked conversation across the country about immigration and whether or not executive action can or should have the power to upend long-standing constitutional practice. I'll have more on that later in the program, but to start us off, here's Neave Barker in our Washington studio.
Thank you, Manuel. Well, the Supreme Court has spoken and the executive order is effectively dead. The ruling to uphold the 14th Amendment on birthright citizens comes at the end of a term marked by intense battles of presidential power. So why do the courts need to act as a check on the powers of the president? And what does this case say about the health of America's democracy heading into the midterms? Let's start by looking at how we got here in the first place. Here's Alex Baird.
To really understand why the United States has birthright citizenship, we have to go right back to the origins of this country and the institution of slavery. In 1619, the first ship arrived in the then British colony of Virginia carrying enslaved people from Africa. For nearly 250 years, hundreds of thousands of black people were enslaved and denied citizenship. In 1857, an enslaved man named Dred Scott was taken by the family who'd enslaved him from Missouri, a slaveholding state, to Wisconsin, where slavery was illegal. He said it had been taken into free US territory and therefore had been automatically freed, but the Supreme Court ruled that black people could not be citizens under the US Constitution. A few years later, the Civil War broke out with the question of slavery at its core. After 4 years of war in 1865, the Union defeated the Confederacy, and with that came the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, abolishing slavery across all of the, once again, United States. But ending slavery didn't settle that question of citizenship. So the next year, the Civil Rights Act was passed, affirming that all people born here in the United States were citizens, including formerly enslaved black Americans. In 1868, the 14th Amendment permanently altered the Constitution to firmly embed that all people born here are citizens. But that's been tested. The defining moment was in 1898 by Wong Kim Ark. Now, he was born in San Francisco to Chinese parents who were legally living in the States but were barred from becoming citizens because they were Chinese. After a trip overseas, he was denied re-entry on the grounds that he was not a citizen. He took the government to court, and in a landmark decision, the Supreme Court ruled that because he was born on American soil, he was a citizen under the 14th Amendment. Since then, the concept of birthright citizenship has remained intact, and now it still is.
OK, so here is the wording of the 14th Amendment. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and the state wherein they reside. Well, Patty Gilhane is outside the Supreme Court here in Washington, D.C. Patty, give us more on how the justices came to their decision.
Well, I have to tell you, this is easily the lengthiest decision I've ever seen from the Supreme Court. And the opinion written by Chief Justice John Roberts really goes through and dismisses every single argument that the Trump administration lawyers made before the court. Interestingly, he said at the end of his opinion that the framers of the 14th Amendment extended that promise to every free-born person in the land. We keep that promise today. So, in essence, the president doesn't have the authority to violate the 14th Amendment. So therefore, in a 6-3 decision, the court says birthright citizenship will stay the law of the land.
Patty, this has been such a divisive issue. What sort of response are we now seeing from this ruling?
Well, we've heard from Republicans, especially lawmakers, saying that this is a catastrophic decision, that is one of the worst decisions the Supreme Court has ever made. We also heard from U.S. President Donald Trump posting on social media, in part, say we can easily now make it up in Congress through legislation that has now been determined during the process. So he doesn't explain exactly what in the process he thinks that this was determined, but in reading other Republican politicians' posts on social media, it's clear they're pointing to the Kavanaugh decision. So Justice Brett Kavanaugh, he did vote that the birthright citizenship will stay the law of the land. But he said that is because, not that it violates the 14th Amendment, because Congress hasn't changed the legislation and it convenes a statute. So some Republicans are saying, well, that opens it up. We can pass the laws in Congress and that will change the 14th Amendment. Problem for him there is this was a 6-3 decision. Even if Congress passes it and it comes back to the court, it still looks like there'd be a 5-4 majority to keep birthright citizenship in place.
Okay, understood. Many thanks for that. Pat Gulhane at the US Supreme Court. Many thanks. Well, the American public has mixed feelings on the issue of birthright citizenship. Half of US adults say people born in the United States to parents who immigrated illegally should have US citizenship, while 49% say they should not. Meanwhile, nearly all US adults, so 95%, say people born in the country to US-born parents should be citizens, and a similar number say people born to parents who moved to the US legally should be citizens too. Well, while the legal arguments focus on the Constitution, the political debate centers on something else, the value of citizenship itself. Manuel Rapallo reports.
Standing outside the U.S. Supreme Court, it's easy to view the debate over birthright citizenship as a legal question. But for critics and supporters alike, the real fight is over who gets access to one of the world's most sought-after nationalities, U.S. citizenship. For most Americans, citizenship is something they acquire automatically at birth, but it comes with significant benefits. Citizens can vote in federal elections, obtain a U.S. passport, work without immigration restrictions, cannot be deported from the country, and travel to most countries around the world visa-free. As the debate intensifies, supporters of birthright citizenship argue those rights should belong to anyone born in the United States, saying the principle is guaranteed by the Constitution.
What those who drafted the 14th Amendment intended is to say that what matters is where you're born, not the legal status of your parents.
This was about slaves.
Critics disagree, arguing the amendment was never intended to apply to people living in the country illegally.
The 14th Amendment was never meant to include people who are here unlawfully. The mere act of setting foot on American soil does not confer birthright citizenship to their children.
Beyond the legal debate, opponents of the policy argue birthright citizenship can create incentives for illegal immigration and birth tourism. For his part, President Donald Trump has repeatedly pointed to those concerns.
Hundreds of thousands of people are pouring into our country under birthright citizenship, and it wasn't meant for that reason.
Critics also argue that children born in the United States may eventually be able to help relatives pursue legal immigration status, creating incentives they say were never intended under the current system. Supporters counter that such cases represent only a small part of a much larger immigration picture. Though the question of birthright citizenship is nothing new, the debate continues to shape the country's conversation about immigration, identity, and belonging, and ultimately, who gets to call America home. Manuel Rapallo, Al Jazeera, Washington.
Okay, well, we are now joined by Eric Ham, political analyst and former congressional staffer, and by Adolfo Franco, a Republican strategist and attorney. A warm welcome to both of you. Thanks for taking the time out to speak to us on This Is America. So look, here it is. 194 pages.
Did you read it all?
I have indeed. No, absolutely not. 1 or 2 pages, but it is exactly, ironically, the same length as George Orwell's 1984. Quick Google just showed me that. Starting with you, Eric. So look, 194 pages of rulings. The judges voted 6-3 against Trump's executive order 14160. The highest court in the land has spoken. Eric, as a national security constitutional analyst, how are you reflecting on this moment?
Well, I think this is a huge win for the Constitution. We know that this is something that has been shrined into law for over a century now, and this is already something that's been adjudicated. And clearly what we're seeing here is President Donald Trump trying to upend the Constitution by executive fiat, and that simply isn't how you actually go about not only reshaping the Constitution, but also making law that will certainly upend many people who already see themselves as citizens in this country. So the fact that the Supreme Court actually ruled the way they did, I think is a huge win. But the fact that you did have at least 4 justices who actually sided with the president on this, but then in the actual ruling, a 6-3 ruling, I think it still speaks to how there is some movement on the court to actually address this issue, perhaps maybe further on down the line.
Adolfo, you've advised on immigration policy. You know the arguments. Your thoughts right now?
Well, let me pick up on what Eric just said at the end. I agree with his last comment. First, I think we were all surprised that it was 6-3. There were some analysts that were predicting 8-1, for example,
right.
Or even maybe a unanimous decision, including the President of the United States, who attended the oral arguments. He said he was likely to lose on this issue, but he was taking it on principle. But the reason I say that is Justice Thomas, in his dissent, said exactly what Eric said. The court will revisit this in the future. Let me speak to a couple things, since we're both lawyers here. Precedent. Okay, if precedent is so important, then I guess we should have segregation, because Plessy versus Ferguson and Dred Scott decisions were 19th century decisions, as was what they were relying on, a case called Wong Kim Art.
Yeah, we'll talk about that.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in a moment. But here's the key, which is it's important to understand. It's really, to me, interesting that the same people on the left who attacked the Second Amendment and right to guns and so forth, that's not what they intended. Remember? They were never talking about handguns. They were never talking about guns. These same people reject the argument that, as your report indicated here earlier, this was about slavery. And certainly in 1868, we didn't have modern travel, and they didn't have immigration laws coming in the way that they exist today. So it was an opportunity for the court to simply look at this and say, this was never the intent. This was about slavery, to say. And then, if I can quickly, on the 1898 case, the Kim case, the parents of the child were legal immigrants. President Trump's talking about illegal immigrants. When you say subject to the jurisdiction thereof, the primary allegiance of an illegal immigrant is not to the United States. There is no allegiance. And their minor children are subject to that same allegiance. So the argument of the majority falls on its face.
All right, let's look into that particular case that you're talking about. So the court relied on that landmark 1898 ruling to protect this right that we've seen. The case, United States versus Wong Kim Ark. He was born in San Francisco, 1873. Chinese parents, they were subject to the Emperor of China. They had permanent residency in the U.S. They had businesses in the U.S.
Correct.
He went out of the country, tried to get back, was blocked, challenged it in the courts and won. And that forms the bedrock that protects the foundational rights from temporary political whims, Eric, surely?
Yeah, but going back to Adolfo's point, I think if we're going to have a president who's actually going to make an executive order that says that we're going to upend the Constitution. We're talking about the 14th Amendment. If the president actually wants this, I think this is actually a lane for the Congress to actually debate and also attempt to try to address this through legal means or through the Congress itself with a constitutional amendment or a new law. Well, but not an executive order by the president.
There's a lot of merit to what Eric says, okay? Because there are boundaries on this, what appears to be absolute right. The Congress has enacted laws. For example, if you're born of a foreign combatant, the child is not a U.S. citizen, as an example. And of course, diplomats and all kinds of exceptions that have been done through legislation, which are absolutely correct. But here's the problem, and modern presidents, and here's where politics, and you know, as a lawyer, I learned a long time ago, every legal decision is either a political decision or a business judgment.
Okay.
But let me say, to speak to this quickly on this is, the fact of the matter is, Congress is broken. And that's why President Obama said he didn't have the authority to do DACA. Right. And then he signed an executive order that he himself said he did not have the constitutional right to do because he was not the king.
Understood. Adolfo, Eric, let me pause you there and bring in some data for you, because the trend in births to unauthorized immigrants in the U.S. has followed the growth and decline patterns of the unauthorized immigrant population over time. That's according to analysis by the Pew Research Center breaking down U.S. Census data. Births to unauthorized immigrant mothers tripled from 1990 to a peak of 380,000 in 2007. They then steadily declined by more than 40% over the next 12 years to 215,000. But from 2019, the trend rebounded upward from 215,000 a year to 300,000 in 2023, just short of a 40% increase. Eric, the Trump administration is calling birthright citizenship a magnet for migration, irrespective of this ruling. Does Trump have a point?
Well, look, the president, I think, is conflating two issues here. If the president has an issue with immigration, then the president needs to address that. But again, we're talking about the United States, where people see the United States as opportunistic. They see it as a place that they can build a better life. If the president somehow wants to actually question or is concerned with people who are coming into this country, he can address that, I think, through immigration matters, not by blowing up the Constitution. And again, I think what we're seeing here
Europe
is
doesn't have birthright citizenship. Is it time for the US to modernize, Eric?
But again, we still have a constitution. If we no longer have a constitution, or if the president of the United States simply does not have to adhere to the laws that are enshrined in the Constitution, then we don't have democracy. So it really doesn't matter in terms of what Europe has, because if we're basically saying that the Constitution only matters when it benefits us politically, then I think that means
the Constitution is the bedrock of this country.
Yeah, but it's subject to interpretation. 3 of the justices, look, I'm a lawyer. I understand the Supreme Court is right because it's final. But 3 justices of the Supreme Court absolutely disagree with that. And Justice Thomas said this will be revisited. Let me say, but let me finish here for a second. Justice Alito said exactly what you were saying earlier. This was never intended as a magnet for this. Obviously, the use of the legislative branch is an avenue. But obviously, as I pointed out, whether it's President Trump or his 4 or 5 latest predecessors, they have used executive power broadly, and the courts have also recognized that. Okay. More recently, in other cases where the president has won on immigration and won on matters, for example, of independent agencies. But you have to, this doctrine is based on something that's silly, and you were saying about other countries. It's something called, in law, it's called jus solis, which means soil you're born on. A medieval concept that's even disregarded by Britain.
Okay, let's get even Britain.
That's where it was born.
Right. Well, let's get some more data on how the picture is internationally, because 32 other countries around the world have birthright citizenship laws that are substantially similar to here in the US. That includes Canada, Mexico, Brazil, Pakistan, Venezuela, and large parts of the Caribbean. Back to you, Adolfo. The American people have lost, argue some conservative analysts that I've been listening to wall to wall throughout the day. They're predicting a spike in people trying to make it over the border now. I mean, how do you read those claims? I mean, some are calling it a complete collapse of Trump's project to change the demographic makeup of the U.S.
I don't believe that because I think the border is secure. We still have issues with overstays, which can be a problem here with people giving birth in the United States and so forth. I don't think it's going to be a colossal turn of events or anything else of that kind. So I don't buy that argument, but I think it's unfortunate. And for example, I think now there will be increased pressure, to Eric's point, in Congress to address things. For example, Chinese that are coming in with these, what they call birth tourisms in the Mariana Islands. We can address that legislatively, and we probably should. This would have been a cleaner and a better way to do it. And I think accepting the president's increasing authority as having executive power in this area and other areas, which the courts have recognized over the last 50 years, could have been possible with 2 more votes. And it would have had a very different outcome.
But again, if the president wanted to do this, all he had to do was go to his Republican-controlled Congress and say, we need stronger legislation.
You worked in Congress. Come on.
Right.
It doesn't pass the laugh test yet. When did President Obama do it with DACA? He said he didn't have the authority.
Well, but what we're seeing here is this president has certainly pushed the bounds on executive power. And we know that, at least based on what we're seeing from the Supreme Court, he has been granted far more powers than we've seen from any other executive, going all the way back to FDR. But again, back to this issue, if the president wanted this, he could have gone to his Congress and said, put a law in place. And we're seeing that he did that just recently. When this decision came down on Truth Social, he now says, Congress, we need stronger and stricter laws to address this issue.
Yeah, that's a nice theory in law school. Right. And Eric knows, and we both work at Capitol Hill.
As much as you're enjoying sparring with each other, we have viewers who also want to know the ins and outs of this story, some of them not here in the United States. So let me ask you this, Adolfo, does this represent a victory for constitutional resilience, do you think?
No, I don't know what that means, but the answer is no. I think this goes down on one of the cases that was wrongly decided, in my view, and will be reversed over a period of time. Again, I really believe absolutely that Justice both Alito and Thomas are right, that this will be something that will be subject to judicial review again.
Eric,
what is this resilience argument? Presidents have always argued whether they're Democrat or Republican on their executive powers.
Eric, I was going to ask you whether the legal argument is done and dusted. Is the political argument over as well? But clearly it's not, is it?
No, not at all. In fact, we know that politically, the president has run on this. We know the president is certainly going to use this heading into the midterm elections. And again, I think this issue, and I think this is why it's so important that the courts actually weighed in on this, because what we're seeing from the president is now the president, if this ruling were, if President Trump's executive order was to be upheld, then basically this becomes a political issue where the president can actually make the argument, make the claim who actually deserves to be in the United States and who does not. And what we're seeing through the Constitution, through the 14th Amendment, is it doesn't say that. It takes politics out of this. And of course, we know that's what the framers want.
But it doesn't. What it does, and the current structure, even before this case was decided, there are boundaries that Congress has decided on non-citizens, as I've mentioned some of them beforehand. The debate, which was a fair debate, is whether you can achieve this through executive power or you have to go to Congress to make this. Okay. That is a legitimate debate. But increasingly, Democrat and Republican presidents have worked with paralyzed Congress. Right, listen, this country can't work this way.
Gentlemen, let me throw into the mix the other issue here, the Trump wins, because the Trump administration has secured some pretty big successes at the Supreme Court recently. Eric, the same court just gave the president total power to fire heads of independent agencies. How is that a check on power?
Well, in addition to that, while the president lost on this issue of birthright citizenship, he also, his executive order on visas and to expel people, he also got a huge victory on that. He got a huge victory on campaign finance.
350,000 Haitians on that as well.
Exactly. So what we're seeing here is the Supreme Court is continuing to extend the president's lead on so many things that he does want. But again, this was a victory which I actually consider not necessarily a victory, more as the Supreme Court is like a broken clock where it is right at least twice a day. And I think we still see very much a Supreme Court that is in the pocket of the president, not necessarily that of the
left.
people.
And my good friend here on the left is always cheering when they get the result they want, and then when they don't, the court is wrong. That's the difference between Republicans and Democrats. I respect the final decision of the Supreme Court. I disagree with it. I don't want to pack the Supreme Court. I don't want to attack the Supreme Court, as your presidential candidates are doing. So they love the Supreme Court when they get the results they want. When they don't, all of a sudden, the Supreme Court's interpretations are wrong. For example, on gun rights and religious liberties and so forth, which are very clear, but they disagree because they want modern views.
Let me ask you, Adolfo, do you think the average American feels more protected now, or do they feel more confused by all of this?
I think the average American on any immigration issue, on any polling, tends to favor the conservative view in the country. And I think politically, putting aside the legal arguments for a moment, I think this is a victory politically for President Trump. And you will see it being played out during the campaigns. I think most Americans do not believe that people coming here as anchor babies and illegals and having babies and so forth here with to establish U.S. citizenship and an anchor is right. And the polling demonstrates that. It really does. Now, if you frame it as just birthright and so forth, yes, of course, if a naturalized citizen or even the Wong case, narrowly speaking, was rightly decided. Okay. But not with respect to illegal immigrants, and most Americans have a very different view.
Eric, if Donald Trump perhaps sees a silver lining in any of this, is there any risk that future presidents will try and take even bolder moves, do you think, going forward?
I think we've already seen that. If you go back to the Obama administration when he first came into power and how he was actually removing a lot of people, a lot of Latinos from the country, got a lot of flack from that, from his base as a result of that. So I do believe typically we do see presidents operating within the constraints of the power that they have been granted. But I think also, too, this needs to be looked at in a bigger picture, because what we're seeing here is you have a lot of people who are, in fact, coming to the United States because if you look at the region, there are a lot of fragile and failed states where people are attempting to leave and come to the United States, given the stability that we see in the United States. Even as many nations are grappling with recession, contraction of their economy.
Freedom of opportunity.
We had that debate in the 2024 election, and his side lost on this immigration issue. But let me tell you something.
You're right. But also, also, but I think, but that's still an issue in terms of if you have the United States surrounded by so many failed states, is that an immigration issue that the court
the worst decision?
We've got about 30 seconds left. I need a very, very short sentence from each of you. Has the meaning of American permanently changed with this fight? A few seconds each.
Absolutely not.
Well, I don't think the meaning of America has changed, but the meaning of the political landscape is going to be shaped by this very wrong decision. There's just a logic to this, which most Americans explained. Even here, people are here legally on a B-1 visa or so forth here at this station in Al Jazeera. The intention is not somebody here for 2 or 3 years to come here, have a baby, and become American citizen.
Right.
That is just illogical.
Final word, you got 10 seconds.
I think this has not fundamentally changed anything for the country, and people still see it as a place.
We'll see the result in November.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks so much. Thanks very much to our guests, of course, Eric Ham, political analyst and former congressional staffer, and Adolfo Franco, a Republican strategist and attorney. That's all from the team here in Washington, D.C. Handing back to Manuel Rapallo and Al Jazeera's global headquarters in Doha. See you all soon. Bye for now.
Thanks, Neave. Now, if you missed any part of this episode, or you just want to check out previous ones, head on over to our YouTube channel. Just type in Al Jazeera English. We'll be back with a brand new episode of This is America at 18:30 GMT. That's 2:30 p.m. Eastern if you're here in the United States. From all of us here in Washington, that's goodbye for now.